Hello everyone, very good morning and welcome to the Daily Hindu News Analysis. Before we start, can you please let me know in the comments if I am clearly audible and visible? Those of you who are watching live, please let me know quickly if I am clearly audible and visible. Great, everything looks good. So, welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Very good morning and welcome to our daily Hindu news analysis. So, let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 11 important articles. We have 5 topics which are relevant for the mains exam, and especially the first 2 topics, they deserve a detailed and comprehensive analysis. Then we have few small articles which are important for the prelims exam. So let's cover all these topics one by one in complete detail so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. I hope you guys are liking our initiatives and benefiting from them. And if you are, please support us with your likes and comments. And don't forget to share these videos with other aspirants as well. Now, before I start, I urge you to join my Telegram channel by scanning the QR code provided over here, because after the session ends, I'll be sharing the PDF of this class in this Telegram channel. Now let's get started with today's analysis by looking at this first article from page number 12. See, the Sunday newspaper is always very interesting because the Hindu brings out many interesting articles from different sectors and different subjects. So this particular topic here is relevant for both polity and international relations and security. This column is exploring the provisions of the proposed Immigration and Foreigners Bill 2025, which the Ministry of Home Affairs is all set to introduce in the Parliament in the second half of the budget session. Right now, the Parliament is in budget session. The second half is all set to begin in a few days. And the Ministry of Home Affairs is going to table a new bill to regulate immigration into the country, that is to regulate the entry of foreigners. Now, this topic acquires a lot of significance given the global debate on immigration, be it the anti-immigration trend which you see in Europe or the political controversy that Donald Trump's administration has triggered in the United States over the topic of immigration. It becomes significant from India's perspective as well as a result of the global debate which is going on. India also has received a lot of illegal migrants in the past, continues to receive illegal migrants, especially from some of the neighboring countries. India has often received illegal migrants from Bangladesh, a few from Myanmar as well. So India has been dealing with the challenges posed because of illegal migration, the illegal entry of foreign nationals into our country. So to regulate the entry of foreigners and to streamline immigration related issues, the government is looking to push a new bill in the Parliament, the Immigration and Foreigners Bill 2025. So let's take a look at the proposed provisions. Why is it important? How is it different from the existing legal provisions? See, right now, immigration and entry of foreigners is regulated under 4 different laws. There are 4 separate legislations currently that deal with this, and 3 of them are pre-independence legislations, meaning they were passed during colonial times. They have a colonial legacy behind them. Many of these laws are outdated. They don't suit the interests of current times. So this new bill, which seeks to replace these 4 laws, these 4 laws include the Foreigners Act of 1946, the Passport Entry into India Act 1920, Registration of Foreigners Act 1939, and the Immigration Carriers Liability Act 2000. So please make a note of these 4 legislations which are set to be replaced by this new bill. This could be important for your prelims as well. Since there were multiple laws dealing with immigration and the entry of foreigners, there would be a lot of provisions which would overlap with each other, which would create legislative vacuum as well. So to get rid of these complications and to simplify the governance of immigration and the regulation of foreigners, this law is likely to be enacted by the Parliament. To avoid the multiplicity of laws and to simplify these legal provisions, to avoid the overlapping nature of these laws, and also to get rid of the colonial legacy that has been left behind. That is the primary purpose, the objective of this particular bill, which has been drafted by Ministry of Home Affairs. Because MHA is the nodal ministry to deal with immigration and entry of foreigners, as it falls under the subject of internal security. Now let's take a look at the key provisions and how it is different from the existing provisions. Now, for example, the proposed bill defines the functions of an immigration officer at the port of entry. The port of entry could be an airport or a seaport or even a land port. This is where foreigners make an entry into the country officially. Those who possess the legal documents and travel documents, those foreigners who have passports with them and a legal visa issued by India, those who have those travel documents, when they enter from these ports of entry, their documents are thoroughly checked and verified by the immigration officers at the immigration desk. I'm sure when you have come back to India from a, let's say, a foreign visit, you would have gone through the immigration process, or if you've gone to a foreign country, you would have experienced the immigration process, where an immigration officer at the port of entry checks your documents, checks your passport, whether it's legally valid, whether it's original genuine passport. They'll check whether you have a travel document, a visa, and whether you meet other eligibility criteria laid down by the immigration rules of that country. Only if you satisfy these guidelines, only then you are given entry into that country. This is the basic norm as far as immigration is concerned in any part of the world. So this law defines the functions of the immigration officer and provides the legal authority to the Bureau of Immigration. Under MHA, we have the Bureau of Immigration, which handles the entry of foreigners, and it provides the legal backup for all immigration related functions. It lays down the requirements with regard to passports and travel documents and visa, etc., and any other matter related to foreigners, their registration. If there are illegal foreigners present in the country, how should they be detained? How should they be deported and repatriated back to their home country? All those provisions are contained in this bill. So it will not only provide for the functions of immigration, it will also provide for registration of foreigners in the country. It will also provide for mechanisms to track the foreigners in the country who might be overstaying their visa. Sometimes foreigners might come with a legal visa, with a valid visa, but they might overstay and they might try to reside in the country as illegal migrants. So this law will enable the tracking of such foreigners. It will enable the tracking of any illegal migrants who have entered the country without the right documents, without right legal passports and visa and other travel documents. So all those provisions are defined under this law, and it provides legal backing for immigration functions which are carried out by the Bureau of Immigration. It also places few obligations on educational institutions like colleges, universities that receive foreign students. It places few obligations on hospitals and medical institutions as well that receive foreign patients, because India is a hub for medical tourism where many foreign nationals come to India for medical treatment. Similarly, many foreign students come to our country to study in our colleges and universities. So they also have a duty and an obligation to maintain appropriate records, to provide the information to the authorities when necessary. So those obligations are being placed on these institutions in the country which receive foreign students and foreign patients. See, right now, under the existing immigration laws, foreigners are supposed to register themselves mandatorily at the FRRO. If they are staying in our country beyond a certain limit, they have to register themselves at the Foreigners Regional Registration Office, which is essentially under the state police. The state police play a very important role in keeping a check on the entry and exit of foreigners, in registering the foreigners present in the state, and also in tracking the foreigners and keeping a check on their travel documents and their visa validity. So right now there is a mandatory requirement for foreigners to register under FRRO. They have to visit regularly the foreigners' regional registration office and provide the documents, share their biometrics, etc. Right now, it's mandatory for hotels, guest houses, resorts, which receive foreign guests to provide all the documents with the police, with the authorities. When foreign nationals stay in hotels and resorts, their passport details will have to be shared by the concerned hotel with the local police and the FRRO. This is a legal requirement, a mandatory requirement that exists even now. So these provisions will continue. These provisions will continue where FRRO registration will be mandatory. There is an e-portal for this as well, where online registration can be done by the foreigners, which will simplify the process of registration. The e-portal will help the state police to easily keep a track of the foreigners in the state and their visa expiry dates. The hotels and other institutions which are responsible, they will have to continue sharing the documents with the police and the FRRO so that the legal requirements are satisfied. Then those foreigners who don't meet certain criteria, their movement, their basic rights, some of the rights can be restricted by the authorities. Let's say a certain foreigner is a threat, who is posing a threat to the public order, or there are other grounds which are clearly defined. If there are any offences, violations committed by foreigners, if they don't match the immigration requirements, then some of their basic rights, including their right to movement, can be restricted. The civil authorities can control places which are frequented by foreigners, like national monuments, for example, or public places where foreigners frequent regularly. Those places can be controlled and regulated by the civic authorities, and they can enforce certain regulations on foreigners as well. So these provisions will be defined under the bill. The liability of the carriers and their obligations, the consulting firms, the travel agencies, the airlines, which are intermediaries, which bring foreign nationals into our country, they have certain liabilities on them, they have certain obligations on them. So that is defined under this bill. Because in many cases, these intermediaries might collude with human traffickers to enable illegal migration into our country. There could be a fake travel agency or a rogue consulting firm which is providing fake documents, fake passports and visas for foreigners to enter the country illegally. So to act against them and to take strict action against these miscreants, right, there is an obligation, a liability placed on the carriers, the intermediaries who facilitate migration and illegal migration into the country. And it also places the burden of proof of citizenship on the foreigner. Essentially, if let's say authorities accuse an individual of being an illegal migrant, or let's say the authorities accuse a foreigner of overstaying their visa limit, then it's up to that individual to prove in the court that they are here on legal documents and that they are a resident, a citizen of a certain country. They need to provide those documents and proof and establish that in a court of law. So these provisions are contained in this new proposed bill. Now, on what grounds can the government deny the entry for foreigners into our country? On what grounds can government restrict the stay duration of foreigners in the country? This has to be clearly defined as well. And you find those provisions in the new bill. See, under the existing laws, of course, government had the power to deny entry to foreigners. But the specific grounds were never explicitly defined. If you look at the existing rules and laws that exist, immigration authorities often turn down the entry request of foreigners. They even send them back, deport them as well. This is common practice. If a foreigner doesn't meet the requirements, immigration authorities have the right to detain them and deport them as well. But the explicit grounds on which they can be deported, the grounds on which their entry can be denied into the country was never explicitly defined. It was only part of the immigration manual used by the immigration authorities, but it was never legally defined. It was never codified. Now this is being done through the Immigration and Foreigners Bill. It specifically states certain grounds on which we can deny entry to foreigners and even curtail their stay and send them back to their home country. If a foreigner poses a threat to our national security, if they are involved in certain activities which is a threat to the security of the nation, the sovereignty and integrity of India, or India's friendly relations with a foreign state, on these specific grounds, entry to foreigners can be denied by the immigration authorities. And if foreigners have already entered the country and then they commit these offences, Their stay can be curtailed even if they have a legally valid visa. They can be detained by the authorities and they can be deported, repatriated back to their home country. So these grounds are explicitly defined. If you look at Foreigners Order 1948, the only ground which was mentioned here was threat to public safety. And if, let's say, someone carries an infection or someone suffers from mental illness, or if their legal travel documents are not valid, or if they are facing extradition in some other country, or if they have previously been denied entry into the country, only such grounds were defined. It never defined grounds such as threat to national security or threat to sovereignty, integrity of India, threat to foreign relations of India. Now, these grounds have been added and it empowers immigration authorities to deny the entry to foreigners if they pose a threat on these grounds. The central government essentially has this authority through the Ministry of Home Affairs and Bureau of Immigration. Immigration officials can take the decision and their decision is final and binding. Though there is a due process, those who have been denied entry can even try to approach the courts and try to follow the due process. But until the courts intervene and pass a ruling, the orders of the immigration officer will be final and binding. So authorities can basically ensure that foreigners who don't meet these requirements don't enter the country. They can even be sent back to their home country. Those who are already in our country, even on legal visa, even if their visa is still valid, they can still be asked to go back. They can still be detained and deported under the powers of this law. Now, what will be the penalties that will apply on those who violate the provisions? Very strict penal provisions are being brought in for the violators. If someone tries to enter our country without a legal passport and travel documents, punishment is up to 5 years of jail term with 5 lakh rupees of fine. It can be both or it can be one of them. Very strict punishment is being provided. Those who try to enter India without a legal passport, without legal travel documents, they can be jailed up to 5 years after following the due process or impose a fine of 5 lakhs or both. Then those who enable foreigners to procure illegal documents, it could be fraudsters or these fraudulent travel agencies, consulting firms, human traffickers. If someone is supplying fake passports, fake visas and travel documents to these illegal foreigners, those entities, individuals can also be punished very strictly with a prison term of not less than 2 years, which can even extend up to 7 years. So this will help in cracking down on these fraudsters and these fraudulent travel agencies and consulting firms, which might be enabling illegal migration. And finally, if foreigners overstay the visa limit, let's say visa has been issued for 3 months or 6 months or 1 year. If foreigners overstay the visa limit and don't report this to the FRRO, if they don't get their visas renewed, then they can be punished with a jail term up to 3 years along with a hefty monetary penalty. So please note that penal provisions are very strict and the states are essentially given this role to enforce this particular law. The states play a very big role in enforcing these rules and guidelines, especially the state police. That's because the central government doesn't have a dedicated federal force to enforce these rules against foreigners and to enforce these immigration related guidelines. So center, the Home Ministry relies upon the state police to execute these functions. So in every state, the state police will have a dedicated department or a wing that looks after foreigners in that particular state. The Foreigner Regional Registration Office works closely with the state police, and state police will have access to all the data with regard to the registered foreigners, their passport details, their visa details, and their other documents. Everything is accessible to the state police. Now, let's say a foreigner might be staying in India for a long time and they might have become residents of India. They might have even procured documents in India, including the Aadhaar, which is given to residents of the country. Aadhaar is not exclusive to the citizens, it's for the residents of the country. So all those documents will have to be submitted with the FRRO, which is made accessible to the state police. State police will keep an eye, they'll keep a check on the foreigners present in the country, whether they're following the immigration rules or not. So state police plays a very critical role over here. And if someone, let's say they don't have the right documentation, someone, let's say they lost the passport or their passports are expiring, their visas are expiring, the responsibility lies on the foreigner to get them renewed, to approach the embassy or high commission to the country that they belong to get their passports renewed, to get their visas renewed by applying again to the home ministry. So these norms will have to be followed by the foreigners, and state police and FRRO are responsible for enforcing them. Now, what about detention centers? Does India have detention centers? Now, this itself is a very controversial topic because in many countries, the very topic of detention has raised concern. Now, for example, take a look at how US has been deporting illegal migrants, including Indian illegal migrants. The Trump administration has been using very harsh methods, almost treating illegal migrants as criminals by handcuffing them and by transporting them in military planes, denying them even basic rights. This has been widely condemned. In many other countries as well, detention centers have been very controversial, even in countries like China. Detention centers have acquired a lot of controversy because of the violation of human rights that is possible at these detention centers. That's why the bill carefully avoids the term detention center. The proposed bill does not explicitly use the term detention center. Instead, it provides the powers to the authorities, the state police and the civic authorities, to detain those foreigners who are in violation of these rules, right? The security officials at the airport and ports of entry, the immigration authorities, state police, civic authorities, they will get these powers to detain and maintain the foreigners, illegal foreigners, under their supervision. So state governments have the responsibility to create those centers. In fact, states need not even get approval from MHA to set up a detention center. Without even approval from MHA, states on their own, if they have a high burden of illegal migrants and illegal foreigners, they can set up these centers where foreigners will be placed under the supervision of the authorities. Their right of movement can be restricted and curbed. Is that clear? Their activities can be curbed. This is seen as a reasonable restriction. It's not a violation of fundamental rights or human rights. Without adopting aggressive methods like handcuffing them or putting them in a prison or a jail. Please understand, there is a difference between a jail and a detention center. They are detained here just to restrict their right to movement. It's not that they are handcuffed and treated like criminals. No, they'll enjoy all their basic rights. They'll just be placed in these centers where they have to live for the time being till the authorities determine the next course of action. Eventually, the next course of action will be deportation. But that is a time-consuming process because you need to send the documents to the other country. Other country will have to verify and accept that they are their citizens and agree for the deportation. So this is a time-consuming process. So in the meantime, illegal foreigners can be placed in these centers under the supervision of the authorities, but of course with their basic rights. They'll be given all the basic necessities. They'll be having all the basic facilities and amenities provided. But apart from right to movement, they can't leave the facility. They'll be under the strict supervision of the authorities, and that is exactly a detention center. The bill avoids the term detention center given the controversy surrounding the term, but it does provide for such facilities which states can set up. MHA has even brought out a detention center manual as to how the detainees have to be treated, how their basic rights have to be protected while restricting their right to movement, what kind of amenities, facilities have to be provided to them. All those protocols are listed under the detention center manual issued by the MHA, and states can set up these centers where illegal foreigners can be detained, or those foreigners who are violating these laws, they can be detained in these centers who await their deportation. Now coming to the tracking of foreigners, what mechanisms do we have in the country? As I told you, foreigners have a mandatory obligation to register with the FRRO if they are staying beyond a certain limit. The tourists need not register with FRRO, but those who are coming for studies, those who are coming for work, those who are residing in the country for a prolonged period of time, they have to register mandatorily with FRRO. There is an online portal as well, which has been created for this purpose. This entire data is available to the state police and other security agencies and authorities, including intelligence agencies. They keep a close watch on the documents of these foreigners, the passports, visas, they have the visa expiry date. They'll try to identify how many of them are overstaying their visa limit. In fact, the MHA has even asked Unique Identification Authority of India to create a negative list of those who have Aadhaar cards made fraudulently. Many fraudulent Aadhaar cards have been made. So MHA has asked the UIDAI to give a negative list of Aadhaar cards which have been procured fraudulently, so that police and security agencies can follow up and check how many of them are illegal foreigners who have tried residing in India and procured these fake Aadhaar cards. So this is the mechanism which has been put in place on the back end. On the back end, there is an entire process, an entire security system created by the Home Ministry with the state police to keep an eye on the foreigners, especially those who are overstaying their visa limit, and especially those who might be in violation of the rules and laws of the country. So this is what you need to learn. So please wait for this bill to be tabled. Follow the debates in the parliament. There might be some amendments which might be pushed into it. Eventually, it will be enacted very soon. So the topic can become very, very important for our mains exam, given the global debate surrounding immigration. So please take up this practice question. Examine the key provisions of the proposed Immigration and Foreigners Bill 2025. Let's see how many of you can write a good answer, and please post your answers in the comment section. Now let's look at another interesting article, a very important article on the same page, on page 12, that talks about President's Rule, which is contained under Article 356 of the Indian Constitution. The topic is in news because in Manipur, as we discussed yesterday as well, President's Rule has been finally imposed after nearly 1.5 years of ethnic violence and conflict and the failure of the Biren Singh government to manage and contain the situation. Finally, Biren Singh resigned as the chief minister, and the ruling BJP could not find a new leader to assume the office of the chief minister. Though it had the majority in the assembly, it could not find a new leader. Eventually, the center has brought in President's Rule. The president has proclaimed President's Rule under Article 356, and the State Assembly of Manipur has been kept in suspended animation. So as a result, it becomes important to understand what is President's Rule. What are the provisions of Article 356? On what grounds can President's Rule be imposed in a state? What's the controversy surrounding Article 356? There is alleged misuse of Article 356 by ruling parties at the center. So what is that controversy? What have been important court rulings, Supreme Court observations regarding Article 356? That is what we need to understand. What do you mean by suspended animation? What happens to the state government in the assembly when President's Rule is brought in? These are some basic details you need to know for your prelims and as well as for your mains. So let's start with the provisions of Article 356. See, Article 356 is part of the emergency provisions. It's an extraordinary provision provided in the Constitution, and our founding fathers, the framers of Indian Constitution, envisaged this article as an extraordinary emergency provision to deal with the failure of constitutional machinery in the state. See, India is a federal setup where states have their own jurisdiction, where center has to respect the boundaries of the state. But in certain matters, if a state is not able to function in line with the Constitution, if there is a complete failure and collapse of the constitutional machinery in a state, if the governance and administration of a state cannot be carried out in line with the provisions of our Constitution, then it means that the time has come for the central government to step in and to dismiss such governments and pave the way for the next administration. That is why this extraordinary provision has been included to account for failure of constitutional machinery in a state. Now, to invoke Article 356 and to proclaim President's Rule, there has to be a report from the governor of the state, or there has to be certain inputs available to the president. Since it's the President of India who will be proclaiming the President's Rule based on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers, there should be a report from the governor of that concerned state stating that the administration, governance of the state cannot be carried out. It can no longer be carried out in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. Or there should be other inputs available with the central government, with the president, essentially, based on which such a proclamation can be issued. Essentially, there should be a merit. There should be a verifiable case. It can't be just out of malified intention. It can't be at the whims and fancies of the Council of Ministers and the President of India. Of course, this is not a discretionary power of the President. President has no discretionary power here. Please understand. President of India, he or she is bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So center at its whims and fancies can't simply dismiss the state government and the state assembly. There has to be certain grounds which has to be established through the report of a governor, or there should be other inputs available with the center based on which Council of Ministers can recommend to the president that this state's administration can no longer be conducted in accordance with the constitution. And then the president can proclaim president's rule under Article 356. Now, what happens when president's rule is proclaimed? Once president's rule is proclaimed, the state government essentially collapses and the state assembly can either be dissolved entirely or it can be kept in suspended animation. Now, who will look after the administration in that case if there is no state government and state assembly? Then these powers are transferred to the union government. Essentially, the function of the state government and the governor's office, the executive administrative functions, governance related functions of the state government, the executive authority of the state government and the office of the governor transfers to the office of the president, which essentially means the union government, because president is bound by aid and advice of Council of Ministers. President has no discretionary power here. So the executive functions of the state, the administrative functions of the state will basically transfer to the union government. Then the state assembly's legislative powers, the law-making powers of the state assembly will transfer to the Parliament of India. So we will discuss what is suspended animation, right? And I'll come to that a little later. But first, let's talk about the provisions of Article 356. So now we understood that once president's rule is proclaimed, state government essentially is dismissed. The powers, the executive powers of the state government and the office of governor transfers to the office of the president, which essentially means the union government itself. Then powers of the assembly, the legislative powers, transfers to the parliament. Since it's an extraordinary power, to prevent its misuse, there are certain checks and balances in place. Now, president's rule will not affect the powers of the High Court in any manner. Judiciary is not touched. This ensures the independence of the judiciary. Is that clear? Please note down this important point. President's rule proclamation will only affect the state government and the state assembly. It will have no impact, absolutely no impact on the state judiciary, on the High Court. Now, this proclamation that has been issued by the president should be essentially laid before the parliament within the expiry of 2 months. From the date of proclamation, within the next 2 months, it should be tabled in the parliament and it should be ratified by both the houses, both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha have to ratify this proclamation within 2 months of the date of proclamation. Is that clear? This can be renewed every 6 months. Essentially, a proclamation is valid for 6 months duration. At the end of the 6-month expiry period, it can be renewed by the parliament. But the grounds have to be again established and discussed and tabled in the parliament, and it should be ratified by both houses of the parliament. This creates a system of checks and balances to prevent the abuse and misuse of Article 356. Then there is another checks and balance. The maximum period of president's rule is capped at 3 years. Is that clear? The maximum period of president's rule in a state is capped at 3 years, but there are exceptions. Now see, after the first year, let's say president's rule has been extended up to 1 year. Now if it has to be extended to the second year, then the renewal can take place only under certain conditions. There are a couple of conditions which have to be met. One, there should be an emergency declared in the country or in that particular state, a national emergency under Article 352. If it is in operation across the country or in that particular state, then yes, president's rule can be extended beyond 1 year, or election commission should certify to the parliament that state elections cannot be held. Right now, the situation is not conducive to conduct elections. Let's say there is violence going on or militancy going on. Depending on these circumstances, election commission, if it states that it's not conducive to hold elections now, based on this, president's rule can be extended beyond the 1 year period. These are the various checks and balances present. But despite all these checks and balances, ruling parties at the center have blatantly misused Article 356 time and again, especially to dismiss opposition-ruled state governments. That is where the controversy arises. That highlights the shortcomings of Article 356 and raises questions about such extraordinary provisions as well. Till date, Article 356 has been invoked almost 135 times in our country. Since independence, 135 times president's rule has been imposed in our country. Now, let's see the circumstances, the grounds based on which president's rule can be proclaimed. The Constitution doesn't specify this. The Constitution doesn't explicitly provide the grounds. It only states that if a state's administration cannot be carried out in accordance with the Constitution, then president's rule can be imposed based on the report of the governor or other inputs. But the explicit provisions are not mentioned here. Lok Sabha Secretariat brought out a comprehensive list based on the study of all the periods of president's rule in the country in 2016 and identified the most popular grounds on which president's rule has been brought in. The most popular ground has been militancy and law and order, especially in Jammu and Kashmir, Punjab, and in Northeast India. The existence of a direct security threat, which threatens the sovereignty of the nation, which threatens public order, which threatens the integrity and national security of the nation. This has been the most popular ground. Then defections by MLAs, where MLAs defect to the other party and the majority party might lose support, where it has to prove its majority on the floor of the House. Breakup of coalition governments. If coalition partners withdraw support to the government, then the very mandate of the government is in question. So this becomes a ground, and if a new coalition is not able to be stitched, then in that case, president's rule can be brought in. Then a no confidence motion, if it's passed against the current government. Resignation of the chief minister, which will dissolve the council of ministers at the state level. Right? This could be a ground. If no viable government can be formed, then president's rule can be brought in until the next elections can be held. Absence of legislatures in a newly formed state. Let's say a new state has been created. It may not have a legislature. So until elections are held to the new state, president's rule will be imposed on that new state. Then if there is large scale public agitation going on, mass violence, mass protest going on in a particular state, which has affected the functioning of the state, this is also a ground. In the legendary S.R. Bommai case of 1994, the Supreme Court of India detailed few other grounds. The Supreme Court gave a list. Though Supreme Court said it's not an exhaustive list, the Supreme Court also reiterated these grounds, stating on which grounds president's rule can be brought in, on which grounds president's rule cannot be brought in. So the S.R. Bommai case is very critical in the case of Article 356, because this intervention of the Supreme Court in 1994, based on a petition by former Chief Minister of Karnataka, S.R. Bommai, it led to new checks and balances being introduced with regard to Article 356, which in a way at least has to an extent helped in curbing the misuse of Article 356. As I told you, it has been used 135 times since independence. Now, if you see the state which has seen the most number of president rule with regard to number of years, it is Jammu and Kashmir. J&K is right at the top with almost 15 years of president rule. Clearly, the ground for imposing president's rule has largely been persistent militancy, the security situation. Clear? Then second comes Punjab. In fact, Punjab was the first state where president's rule was brought in after independence in 1951, when the then Congress chief minister of the Punjab government had differences with the central leadership. The government had been dismissed in 1951, which is the first instance of president's rule being used in post-independent India. So the state with the highest period of president's rule is Jammu and Kashmir, with almost 15 years being under president's rule. Then comes Punjab. Again, the ground has been largely militancy, terrorism associated with the Khalistan movement. Then third comes Manipur with 11 times, close to 11 years of president's rule, again due to insurgency. So Northeast insurgency in Manipur. The security situation on the ground in Manipur has been the prime cause. Then finally, you have Uttar Pradesh at the fourth place, which has seen 10 times imposition of president's rule. This could largely be due to political reasons, given that UP plays a pivotal role at the level of national politics as well. 10 times president's rule has been imposed in UP, and sometimes on the grounds of public order as well. So this is what you need to know regarding the imposition of president's rule. Now, let's talk about the S.R. Bommai case, and before that, let's also discuss the misuse of Article 356. Despite all these checks and balances, ruling parties at the center have blatantly misused this particular provision. See, generally, we've always heard that ruling parties at the center misuse 356 to dismiss opposition ruled state governments. For example, we saw in 1977, post the emergency period, the dark period of Indian democracy, the Morarji Desai government, which came to power, dismissed 9 Congress ruled governments in 9 states by stating that these state governments did not have the confidence of the electorate. 3 years later, when Indira Gandhi came back to power in 1980, she returned the favor by suspending these 9 governments by imposing president's rule. So both the actions were a blatant misuse of Article 356. Unfortunately, back then the Supreme Court refused to intervene in the matter. That's why the SR Bommai case is so critical. Understood? Now don't think it's only opposition ruled states which are dismissed. Now take the case of Manipur, for example. The Biren Singh government was a BJP government. At the center, it's the BJP which is in power, right? So even if the same parties are in power, president's rule has been brought in. There have been such instances. Take, for example, in Karnataka in 1990, in Andhra Pradesh, in Assam, right now in Manipur, in Gujarat in 1974. There have been certain instances where even if the same party is in power at center and state, on certain grounds, the governments have been dismissed and president's rule has been brought in. So either it could be because of lack of majority, right? Or it could be because of the security situation, which is the case with regard to Manipur. Now, coming to the Bommai judgment, why is this case so important? SR Bommai, the former Chief Minister of Karnataka, who had been a victim of the misuse of Article 356, approached the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court delivered a historic verdict. A 9-judge bench ruled that proclamation of president's rule is subject to judicial review. The courts can review the proclamation, whether it's valid, whether it has been proclaimed on valid grounds. Is there a merit for imposing president's rule, or are there any malified intentions? Is there a political motive to bring in president's rule? This can be checked, verified by the court, which essentially means the proclamation can even be struck down by the Supreme Court if it is found to be unconstitutional. Have we seen this happening? Yes. Recently, in the last, let's say 10 years, under the Modi government, president's rule has been imposed 11 times. And in 2 cases, one was with Arunachal Pradesh, the other was with Uttarakhand. In both the cases where president's rule had been proclaimed, Supreme Court struck them down as unconstitutional, and it can restore those governments and assemblies which had been suspended. So this is the extraordinary power the Supreme Court has given to itself to review the proclamation of Article 356. It has placed checks and balances to prevent the misuse, but still its blatant misuse continues. Since the center will have numbers in the parliament, the misuse of Article 356 continues. It was in the same case, in the Bommai case, that Supreme Court laid down few guidelines for the office of the governor regarding how office of governor is misused to generate this report that the administration of the state cannot be carried on in accordance with the constitution, which becomes a ground for imposing president's rule. Also, the biased nature in which governors have often functioned as agents of center, where they have shown a political bias to favor their own party, especially after elections when there is a hung assembly, or when there is a defection which has happened, or when no confidence motions are pushed, when the stability of the elected state government is under question. Governor's office has often behaved in a biased manner in favor of the ruling party at the center, and as a result, in the Bommai case, the Supreme Court made few observations about the office of the governor. So as I said, despite all these checks and balances, Article 356 continues to be misused, especially when there are political situations developing after elections, when there is a hung assembly, when defections have happened, or when no confidence motion has been pushed, when there is no clear majority. In such instances, 356 is blatantly misused, especially by the ruling party at the center. So the very fact that Supreme Court can review this and strike them down as unconstitutional creates a deterrence. It does create a deterrence for the central government, but still there have been many cases we have seen in the last 30-40 years itself regarding the misuse of Article 356. Now, what does it mean to keep an assembly in suspended animation? See, when president's rule is brought in, the elected assembly has 2 destinies that lie ahead of it. Either it will be dissolved completely or it will be kept in suspended animation. Now, what do you mean by this? If the assembly is dissolved through the proclamation of the president, essentially it will pave the way for the next election, right? Until then, the center will look after the administration, with parliament looking after the legislative business, and election commission will prepare for next elections to be held to elect the next assembly. But in other cases, assembly can be kept in suspended animation, which means assembly has been suspended, not dissolved, which means it can be brought back, it can be revoked. If president's rule is revoked, this assembly which had been elected through previous elections will become active again. That's the case in Manipur right now. The assembly has been kept in suspended animation. If president's rule is revoked without elections being held, then the previous assembly can be brought back to life. So that is the meaning of keeping the assembly in suspended animation. So these are some key pointers that you need to know about Article 356. We have not only studied the provisions, but we have analyzed the controversy surrounding it, the allegations of its misuse. So please take up this practice question. Let's see how many of you can write a good answer for this question. Now next, we have few articles which are all very small articles, be it Article 3, 4 and 5, which is part of the mains discussion itself, and the prelims articles. They're all very small articles. We can quickly go through them one by one. So let's start with this article on page 6, which deals with public smoking. I'm sure all of you know that there is a ban on public smoking in India. But do you know the history behind it? How did this ban come about with regard to public smoking? Because smoking is absolutely injurious to health, not just to the smoker, the active smoker, but even to passive smokers who might inhale the smoke. Cigarette smoking, tobacco consumption is associated with cancers and various respiratory disorders and many other health conditions. Many non-communicable diseases are linked with cigarette smoking and tobacco consumption, and public consumption of tobacco and public smoking of cigarettes is a public health hazard. It's not only a threat, a health hazard for the individual who's consuming it, but even for others around in a public space. It was in 1999, thanks to Justice K. Narayana Kurup of the Kerala High Court, that for the first time in India, a ban was placed on public smoking. Justice Narayana Kurup interpreted this under Article 21, which gives you right to life. Your right to health is protected under Article 21 as part of right to life. Nobody has a right to take away that right from you. So smokers and those who consume tobacco publicly, they are threatening your health. So using this interpretation, the Kerala High Court in 1999 delivered this historic judgment, placing a ban on public smoking for the first time in India. This paved the way for the Supreme Court to intervene in the Murli S. Deora case in the same year in 1999, extending the ban on public smoking across the country. And this pushed the government and the parliament to finally conceive a law to ban public smoking in the country. This law is nothing but the COTPA of 2003, Cigarettes and Other Tobacco Products Act, which prohibits public smoking with hefty penalties. See, there is a study, a global study which is conducted called Global Adult Tobacco Survey. This is according to WHO guidelines. The WHO works with national governments to conduct the Global Adult Tobacco Survey. Please write this down, very important for prelims as well. As per WHO standards, the Global Adult Tobacco Survey is conducted across countries, especially in few emerging countries, developing nations, poor countries, and India is part of this survey. This gives you some accurate data regarding tobacco consumption and cigarette smoking in the country. According to this survey, in 2009-2010, 34.6% of our population was consuming tobacco, which was significantly higher. Today, it has declined to 28.6% as per data from 2016-17. But however, don't forget, our population has increased as well. So in absolute numbers, the number of tobacco consumers and smokers has gone up significantly in India. Especially the risk is with regard to minors in schools and colleges getting addicted to cigarettes and tobacco, the rising number of smokers amongst women, and though there is a decline, a percentage-wise decline with regard to smokers and tobacco consumers in men, absolute numbers have increased significantly. This is the health risk that has been flagged by policymakers and as well as healthcare providers. Studies have established that in India, 27.5% of all cancer cases in men have been linked with cigarette and tobacco consumption. Of all the cancer cases in men in India, we register around 1.3 million new cancer cases on an average. So out of the cancer cases amongst men, 27% of it is because of tobacco cigarette consumption. It's related to it. And also smoking has a long-term impact. Tobacco consumption has a long-term impact. Just because you stop today doesn't mean your health will recover immediately or you're safe from the cancer risk. That persists because smoking has a long-lasting effect. It will take a longer time for your body to get rid of the toxins. And even if you have ceased smoking or tobacco consumption, the lasting effect, the cancer risk will still be present. So that is something you need to know. Now, the last point here, the article is making. This is a means related point. Despite the ban being in place, despite the government spreading enough awareness, you might have seen in every theater before the movie plays, there are public awareness ads that are played out. Right? Cigarette packaging has been regulated to promote the health hazard and to deter the public from taking up smoking. Prices have been increased every now and then with higher taxes. There are strict regulations on how tobacco cigarettes can be sold, where it cannot be sold. Despite all this, cigarette tobacco consumption remains high in our country and public smoking continues. Public consumption of tobacco continues. Why? Enforcement is very weak. The police and the local authorities, they don't enforce this very strictly. So this has been the weakness when it comes to our fight against public smoking and tobacco consumption. Next, we have another update from Manipur, which is relevant for mains and prelims. UNLF, the United National Liberation Front. What is UNLF? UNLF is a Meitei insurgent organization, one of the oldest insurgent group in Northeast India. It was formed in 1960s in the Imphal Valley as a Meitei insurgent group to counter Naga insurgents and the Kuki-Zo insurgents who were seen as a threat by the majority Meitei community. So, UNLF led a separatist movement against India. The Meitei insurgents opposed Manipur's merger with India as well. So they were seeking a separate state. They were seeking complete separation from India. It was a separatist violent movement which set up its base in neighboring Myanmar and continued to flourish for many decades. Recently in 2023, as Manipur was going through the ethnic violence and the crisis, the UNLF surrendered and signed a suspension of operations agreement and a peace agreement with the government of India in December 2023. Now, this was a very big development when the peace agreement was signed between Ministry of Home Affairs, the state government of Manipur and the UNLF. It brought one of the oldest insurgencies in Northeast India and in Manipur to an end. This would have had a huge impact in stabilizing Manipur and especially to deal with the current ongoing ethnic violence. Now, as part of the peace process, the center and state, they have to set up these camps where the militant cadres can be hosted. See, this is the general process that follows the signing of a peace agreement. Once a peace agreement is signed with an insurgent group, we have signed such agreements previously as well with Mizo insurgents, with Ulfa, NSE and Bodo insurgents. Similar peace processes have been initiated. So whenever the peace process is going on or when a peace agreement has been signed, one important requirement is that the militant cadres have to surrender. All the militants in the organization have to surrender, lay down their arms and weapons, and until they are brought back into mainstream, until they are brought back into the normal society, they have to be kept under the supervision and the surveillance of the security forces. So these camps are created, security camps, like almost like a detention camp, where these surrendered militants are hosted, where they can reside and live, which is monitored by the security forces, where their arms and weapons will also be surrendered, which will be under the control of the security forces. So this is a prerequisite for the operationalization of a peace agreement with an insurgent organization. So now, central government and state government of Manipur, essentially under President's rule, it will be the center itself. So efforts are being made to set up these two camps where UNLF militants and cadres can be hosted until the peace process will come into full implementation. Now the funds for this particular construction of the camps is being provided through a scheme known as SRE, Security Related Expenditure Scheme. This is very important for your prelims. Security Related Expenditure Scheme is run by Ministry of Home Affairs, where MHA reimburses the security cost incurred by certain states to help modernize their security forces. For example, in Naxal states, in Naxal affected states, MHA provides for reimbursement of the cost for Naxal affected states if the state police is modernized. If state police procure modern weapons, better communication, better armor, and if they modernize and fortify the police stations, whatever cost is incurred, the capital expenditure, right, for modernization of the police force is reimbursed by the center under this scheme called Security Related Expenditure Scheme. So under the same scheme, MHA is funding the construction of these camps where the former militants of UNLF who have surrendered can be hosted in order to operationalize the peace agreement so that they can reside in these camps under the supervision and monitoring of our security forces. Next, we have another important article regarding India-US relations. Following Prime Minister Modi's visit to United States, India-US have launched a key initiative, which I discussed yesterday as well, the Autonomous Systems Industry Alliance, ASIA. Both the countries are looking to collaborate in the field of autonomous systems with focus on underwater domain awareness. See, autonomous systems are nothing but drones. It could be remotely piloted aircraft, which are the aerial drones or unmanned aerial vehicles that all of you are familiar with. Similarly, remotely piloted underwater vessels are also developed for a security purpose. Submersibles or remotely piloted water-based sensors and mobile systems, right, which can track the enemy, which can generate maritime intelligence, underwater intelligence. So underwater systems, autonomous systems are used underwater as well. So in these critical areas, this is a strategic technology, by the way, which is available only with few countries. So US is willing to work and collaborate with India, and this initiative, Autonomous Systems Industry Alliance, will bring our defense industries, our startups, our research institutions and public sector organizations together to work on such autonomous systems. The focus is on underwater domain awareness. See, when it comes to maritime security, there are two focus areas. One is maritime domain awareness. The other is underwater domain awareness. When you have to protect a large sea or an ocean, you need both the priorities to be sorted. You need maritime domain awareness, where you look after maritime intelligence over the surface of the water. You need underwater domain awareness, which is underwater intelligence regarding the movement of enemy submarines. So maritime domain awareness is at the surface level, at the surface of the water, whether the presence of enemy ships, presence of organized criminals, smugglers, traffickers, pirates or terrorists, the movement of such suspicious vessels. This is all part of maritime domain awareness, where intelligence gathering systems are set up, such as coastal radars and other observation systems or satellites or aerial drones are used to generate maritime domain awareness. Or even transport planes, reconnaissance planes are flown over seas and oceans to collect such maritime intelligence, to look at the developments happening at the surface of the water. Similarly, threats can emerge from underwater as well. There could be an enemy submarine, or terrorists might develop an underwater submersible vessel which they might use to infiltrate into a country. So dealing with such underwater threats and generating intelligence on underwater threats is the focus of underwater domain awareness. These two aspects come together to make up your maritime security. So in the India-US relationship, maritime security is a priority right now across the Indo-Pacific. Because in the Indo-Pacific, both India and US are facing many security threats and challenges. If they are facing threats of terrorism, organized crime and piracy in the Indian Ocean, they are facing threats of the rising Chinese naval presence, including Chinese submarines across the Indo-Pacific. In fact, the entire Quad group that consists of Japan and Australia, along with India and US. They have prioritized maritime domain awareness and underwater domain awareness. So as part of this focused relationship between India and US and the Quad group of countries, the ASIA initiative has been set up to promote the procurement of such platforms and technologies which will help in generating underwater domain awareness and maritime domain awareness. The US has already provided many such key platforms to India. For example, yesterday we spoke about the P-8I Poseidon maritime reconnaissance aircraft, which is known as a submarine hunter, a submarine killer. Indian Navy has procured 12 of them, and during Modi's visit to US, we have signed another deal for 6 more P-8I Poseidons to increase our maritime surveillance and submarine hunting capabilities. This is clearly aimed at Chinese Navy, which has been increasingly deploying submarines in the Indo-Pacific. We have also procured the MH-60 Romeo helicopters, which are also used for maritime surveillance, which have underwater surveillance capabilities, which can hunt enemy submarines, just like P-8I Poseidon. We have also signed a contract to procure the MQ-9B Sea Guardian drones, which you see here in this image. The high altitude, long endurance drones, the MQ-9B Sea Guardian, which has been procured for Indian Navy, which also helps in generating maritime domain awareness and underwater domain awareness to track enemy movement. So going forward, India and US, their startups and defense industries and research institutions will work through this initiative to develop autonomous systems, automated, autonomous, remotely piloted underwater systems which can track enemy movement and threats underwater. This could be the Sea Picket autonomous surveillance system that uses sonar acoustic sensors underwater. It could be remotely piloted submersible vessels, which we will jointly develop and co-produce, and other sensors and electromagnetic based technologies, sonar based acoustic technologies, which can help in autonomously detecting any underwater threat. That will be the focus of this initiative. So please make a note of this. Now coming to the prelim section, let's take a quick look at the small articles. On the front page itself, the Hindu carries this spectacular image of a beautiful festival that is marked in Himachal Pradesh, particularly in the Kulu Manali Lahore Spiti region. This festival is known as the Fagli festival. So from art and culture point of view, this topic can be relevant for prelims. The Fagli festival is a very unique festival marked by the people of the Lahore Spiti region. It's locally known as the Kus or the Kunz festival. The people here pay tribute to the mighty mountains, the ranges of the Himalayas. They worship a figurative idol, the baraza, which they create with bamboo stick. They decorate this idol as well. And it is believed to be the depiction of an angel of the Himalayas. It's like the grandmother of the Shikaras, the hills, the goddess of the hills. So this figurative idol is worshipped, decorated, and unique dishes are prepared. And the people dance and celebrate this festival. It's a post-harvest festival that is marked in parts of Himachal Pradesh. Now, what is unique about the festival is that the men dress up in this unique gear, very vibrant, colorful gear that you see here. If you notice, the men are wearing a wooden mask, a very colorful wooden mask, and a robe that is made of dry grass. So please make a note, these features are very important, and they perform this unique dance, which is a standout feature of the Fagli festival in Himachal Pradesh. So please make a note of these key points. They wear a very unique floral headgear with beautiful wooden masks, highly colorful wooden masks with a hand knitted robe made from dry grass. This is a classic feature of the traditional dance that is performed at the Fagli festival. Next, in Jammu and Kashmir, in the Union Territory, the Lieutenant Governor has dismissed 3 government officials of the Union Territory's administration for their suspected links with militant organizations. In fact, in last few years, the Union government has suspended almost 63 government employees since 2020. Since changes were done to J&K, Article 370 was revoked and the special status was abrogated, and J&K state was reorganized into 2 union territories. Since then, as it came under union control, since then 63 government employees of J&K administration have been suspended for their links with militant organizations. Now, under what powers can the Lieutenant Governor suspend government employees? It is under the provisions of Article 311. Please make a note of this. Article 311 provides this power to the President of India at the level of the union government and the central government employees, and the same powers are given to the governor as well with regard to the state level employees, which means Lieutenant Governor also has the same powers with regard to union territories. So government officials who are in a civilian capacity, they can be dismissed from the service of the union or the state on certain grounds. There are certain protections given as well. For example, they can't be dismissed or removed by an authority who is subordinate to that by which he or she was appointed. Only the appointing authority can suspend and dismiss them, which means President in case of central government employees, Governor in case of state government employees, especially on grounds of threat to the security of the state. President and Governor, if they are satisfied that sufficient grounds exist to prove that a certain government employee has threatened security of the nation, they can be suspended, removed from service. This applies for all India services as well, your IAS, IPS, etc., the central secretariat services as well. So under these provisions, on disciplinary grounds, the President and the Governor respectively can suspend central and state government employees. Next, on page 4, there's an article referring to India's largest coal block where mining has just begun. So please note down, the Deocha Pachami coal mining project in the Bihum district of West Bengal is considered to be India's largest coal block, where recently the mining activities, the excavation activities have begun. Now this article is entirely focused on the socio and cultural and economic impact of this project. How locals are feeling threatened as they lose their land, and the subsequent pollution could also threaten the health and livelihood of the locals. That is the focus of this article. So you can go through this, use this as an example in any relevant topic. But just note down from a prelims point of view that Deocha Pachami coal mining block in Bihum district of West Bengal is considered to be India's largest coal block. Next, the Ministry of Panchayati Raj has brought out the Devolution Index ranking with regard to Panchayati Raj system in the country. The Panchayati Raj system, introduced through the 73rd Constitutional Amendment, right, provided for decentralization, provided for local participative governance in the country. PRIs are essentially the pillars of democratic decentralization. So to rate the performance of states regarding the performance of their Panchayati Raj institutions, there is a national level index created by the Ministry of Panchayati Raj. So the central government brings out the Devolution Index ranking, and the state of Karnataka has emerged at the top. Karnataka has been a pioneer in Panchayati Raj institutions. This index, developed by the central government, by the Ministry of Panchayati Raj, it uses 6 dimensions or 6 parameters to measure the performance of state governments. What are the 6 dimensions? One is framework. What is the overall framework and structure of devolution of powers to local governments? Functions, finances, accountability, functionaries, and capacity building. These are the 6 dimensions that are used to measure the functioning of Panchayati Raj system in the country, to rank the states according to their performance. It will check the level of accountability present, whether the required chairpersons are elected to the Panchayati level institutions, whether the required accountability measures are in place, whether the finances are well managed in line with the provisions of the Constitution. So based on this, a ranking is provided for states, and Karnataka has topped most of these parameters, and overall Karnataka has emerged at the top, followed by Kerala and Tamil Nadu. So please remember this ranking. Karnataka has topped the overall ranking, followed by Kerala and Tamil Nadu. Clear? Next, on page 10, we have an article referring to Project Waterworth, which has been referred to in the media as Project Waterworth. So what is this project which has been in the news, Project Waterworth? It was in the news recently during Prime Minister Modi's visit to United States, where India-US issued a joint statement, a joint leader statement regarding collaboration between American companies and Indian companies, especially the tech companies. The US tech giant Meta has announced one of the world's largest underwater submarine cable project to bring high-speed internet connectivity. And this mega project is called Project Waterworth. So this would be a submarine cable network, underwater cable network, a new internet infrastructure that will be created to link 5 continents, as you can see, to link North and South America with Africa, Asia and Australia. And India is critical to these plans. Meta has announced that India is going to be crucial as part of the link, the internet link, which is being created by Meta. A 50,000 kilometer underwater submarine cable is being laid under Project Waterworth, and India will be a key component of this project because India is one of the biggest markets for Meta. It's a private initiative by the tech company, but still it's relevant because this can transform the global internet and social media landscape. And India is the biggest market for all of Meta's products, from Facebook to Instagram to WhatsApp. So please note down how Meta is supporting the back end of the internet infrastructure by setting up this massive underwater submarine cable known as Project Waterworth, and India is a key component in this project. Coming to the last article from Science and Technology, researchers in the Mediterranean who are working on a project, a neutrino observation project known as the Cubic Kilometer Neutrino Telescope or the KM3 net. They have discovered some of the highest energetic neutrino particles in their studies. Recently, researchers have confirmed that they detected some of the most energetic neutrinos ever detected on Earth. I'm sure all of you are aware as to what are neutrinos. They are charged particles that are present across the cosmic universe, right? And they do reach Earth as well. And when they interact with Earth's atmosphere and the water present on Earth, they do undergo certain changes. They can be detected, and it helps in our understanding of the universe itself and the cosmic radiation. So we have neutrino observatories around the world. India also was planning a neutrino observatory to study neutrinos. So there is one such neutrino telescope. It's an underwater neutrino telescope known as the Cubic Kilometer Neutrino Telescope or KM3 net. Where is it located? It's located in the Mediterranean Sea. Why is it located in Mediterranean Sea? Why is it located underwater? That's because this experiment is trying to detect the Cherenkov radiation. This is a unique radiation that's produced by neutrinos that interact with water or ice molecules. When neutrinos coming from the far reaches of the cosmic world, right, when they enter the Earth's atmosphere, they are very faint and almost undetectable. But at certain underground locations, underwater locations, when it interacts with water and ice molecules, it becomes detectable because of the radiation it emits known as the Cherenkov radiation. So to detect this, you need very sensitive instruments, which is isolated and well set up. So as part of this mega project, it's a European project. It's a European research project. Please note this down. There are 2 observatories that are set up under the Mediterranean Sea. One is ARCA, Astroparticle Research with Cosmics in the Abyss, located in Sicily, Italy. The other instrument is ORCA, Oscillation Research with Cosmics in the Abyss, located offshore in France. This looks at neutrino properties generated in the atmosphere. So together it makes up the Cubic Kilometer Neutrino Telescope in the Mediterranean Sea. So researchers use these neutrino telescopes to study and observe neutrinos and study and understand the very origin and evolution of the universe. So please make a note of this and read more about IceCube Neutrino Observatory. This is a small homework for you, small exercise. Please read a little more about IceCube Neutrino Observatory. So on this note, we bring today's discussion to an end. I hope the session has been useful. I hope you've understood all the key topics. And if you like the session, do let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.